remain in bhava. This was, of course, a statement that Sri Ramakrishna heard in kind of an ecstatic state. And it plays a very, very important role in the life of Sri Ramakrishna and in this divine play of Sri Ramakrishna. Remain in Bhavamukha. Does everyone know what it means? Kind of. Okay. Maybe also a very cryptic statement. Anyhow, we'll go through all of this. When we look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we find that he was essentially a mystic. That means that he had special access to spiritual realms. He had this special ability to have lines of communication open with the divine. He could talk to the Divine Mother. He had so many different spiritual experiences that we can hardly compare our minds to his mind. The story that comes to my mind is of the frog in the well, which is a very ancient story. It's in even Chinese traditions, other traditions. Swami talked about it at the Department of Religions. We're all like the frog in the well, that we know our little bit of water and we know side to side. And Sri Ramakrishna is like a frog in the ocean. There are no limits to that. It's the same water. We have access to the same water. We can realize that same divinity and everything, but we can never expect to have that vast openness and all the infinite varieties of experiences that Sri Ramakrishna himself had. One of the very special features of Sri Ramakrishna's mind was this ability to actually hear the words of the Divine Mother. And we get this actually in two different ways. Very often he spoke about this, and we'll see that one of the definitions he gives of the state of vijnana is that you can see God and talk to God. But we know that there were times when he felt as if these words were being provided by the Divine Mother. And he used to give the illustration that when you husk paddy, that there'll be one person who's working the machine, and whenever the paddy is husked and moved, that someone else will be providing more and more, so you never run out. Rosh Tellidao, he used to say that they keep pushing it like that. But the other way, and in that instance, we don't know exactly that everything he says he's hearing first from the Divine Mother. It's not exactly like that. Right? Just he had this feeling that she was supplying all of these. He didn't have to stop and think ahead of time what he would say. So this is the one type, one scenario we can say. The second is when he actually heard distinctly the words of the Divine Mother, that he could repeat and tell other people that he heard this. And we don't know how many times this happened to Sri Ramakrishna, and what the different circumstances were, with the exception of this one single phrase, remain in Bhavamukha. Otherwise, I don't think there's another time when he'll say exactly, I heard these words of the Divine Mother, and he'll tell us exactly what he said. Can anybody think of another instance like that? It's possible, but if we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, even in the Gospel, he doesn't talk about this. He doesn't mention this phrase of Bhavamukha. We get it mostly from the great master, the Persona, and of course all of the biographies. So this is the one great exception where we know very clearly the words that were used that he attributes to the Divine Mother, and he heard the same phrase on 3 different occasions. One time he heard it repeated thrice, one time it was repeated twice, and one time it was just spoken once. So we heard the phrase how many times?
Six.
Six times. Okay.
No, I didn't get this.
Yeah, one time he heard the phrase, the Divine Mother said 3 times. Remain in Bhavamukha, remain in Bhavamukha. So that was one time. Another time she said it twice. And then another time she only said it once. So he heard that phrase 6 different times. In Bengali, the phrase is Ore Tui Bhav Mukhe Thak. So this is the Tui form, like the Tu form in Hindi, that very sweet, that a mother would use for a small child. So it's not the type of command that comes from a very powerful type of God, but like a mother would give to a small child, very loving and very sweet. This Ode, oh my child, Tui Bhavamukhi Tak. And generally in the English translations that we get, we don't have a translation for Bhavamukha. Generally it'll be that he heard the mother say, remain in Bhavamukha. Because, as I say, it's difficult to give a good English translation for that. What we're doing over the next couple of sessions is trying to understand it. But very basically, we can say it means remain in that region between the infinite absolute and the relative, between Nitya and Lila. Bhavamukha, facing one direction, you'll see the infinite Brahman, the formless absolute. Facing the other direction, you'll see everything permeated with God. So in a sense, this is equivalent to the state of vijnana, we can see. And everything that stems from this forms a good portion of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. So we won't find such specific reference to this Bhavamukha in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, but we'll find reference to the experience that he had and to all of the ramifications and everything. The Gospel is filled with all of the different teachings that come directly from this experience and this command of the Divine Mother to remain in Bhavamukha. So the importance of this cannot be overestimated, especially the last time that Sri Ramakrishna heard these words of the Divine Mother, because if he hadn't heard them, then we may not even know who Sri Ramakrishna was. This is before, of course, M could come to record any of his words. This was before Swamiji could come to spread his teachings or anything. His body may have gone. So we would have no gospel, we would have no photographs, we would have no disciples, no Swamiji, and perhaps no Vedanta in the United States. So this is how important it was that not only heard these words, but received that command. Remain in Bhavamukha. That means don't remain in this state of nirvikalpa samadhi anymore, or whatever state he was in, because there were 3 different circumstances. So this very final time, which we'll get to, of course, was when he was in that state of nirvikalpa samadhi, and from which he may not have returned if he hadn't received this command of the Divine Mother. So, without this, we might not have Sri Ramakrishna at all. And because of this experience of entering into nirvikalpa samadhi and coming back from that state, we have a whole series, and we'll get to this, a whole series of very, very important and in many cases original teachings. There are many teachings of Sri Ramakrishna that go beyond what we'll find in the Upanishads, what we'll find even in Shankaracharya and everything. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna, he takes Shankaracharya as the ideal to get us to the roof, and then we're on our own. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't know about this return journey. So many things either flowed from this experience or were confirmed by this experience of this bhavamukha state and being able to attain to the heights and then come down and remain in that state of vijnana. So I'm going to mention some of these main teachings, which we will go over mostly in the next session. But Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of the role of Kundalini and his explanations of how the rising of the Kundalini corresponds to different states of consciousness, different states of awareness, and we can understand this bhavamukha state in terms of remaining between the highest stage of Kundalini, Sahasrara, and going down. Sometimes they'll say maybe to the heart center. So we have this idea of Kundalini. Then this is a very important distinction between the state of jnana and the state of vijnana, which Ramakrishna explains as a special type of knowledge. Now we have these terms, one of the chapters of Gita, with this jnana vijnana, but we don't have the same explanation that Sri Ramakrishna gives for it. This is something unique. This is the way he explains it, both in terms of path of knowledge and the path of devotion. We have almost two different states of vijnana. The one with the Shankaracharya ideal, where he maintains the ego of knowledge, and the other devotee ideal, where one retains the ego of devotion in that state. Then, all of the different capacities to maintain higher spiritual experiences, which he will give to the Ishvara Kotis, and which he will restrict and limit in the case of Jiva Kotis. This goes back to the same idea, especially with regard to samadhi on the one hand, and on the other hand, with regard to the capacity and ability to experience devotional states. So this prema, mahabhava, all of these, we'll find that these will be restricted to those who have some special capacity to withstand them. So these are other things that go along with this. Then his teachings regarding anuloma viloma. This is another special teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, that when we take the path up the steps to get to the roof, that we start with a certain understanding, and we develop along those lines, and we have a certain particular attitude and everything, and then viloma, we come back the other way. Sometimes he says the path of negation and affirmation, and our understanding is different coming down. So if we're on the second rung before we get to the roof on the way up, it's one experience. If we're on that second rung on the way down, it's a different experience. In fact, that the second rung on the way down will be a little bit this bhavamukha state, where we can still see the roof, but we can also see below us. So we have this anuloma viloma. Then this brings us also to this nitya and lila. These were two terms that Sri Ramakrishna used. He uses them throughout the Gospel. The English translation is the absolute and the relative, but in Bengali or Sanskrit it's a little bit more colorful. The eternal and the sportive, we can say, the lila. Corresponding a little bit, we can say, to the paramarthika level and the vyavaharika level, the absolute and the relative. But Sri Ramakrishna has many things to say about this nitya and lila. In fact, sometimes he'll explain this bhavamukha state as being able to go back and forth between the nitya, which will be the roof, and the lila, which will be everything below that. And we'll see this also corresponds somewhat to this idea of swarat and virat. These Vedantic terms, Upanishadic terms, is swarat, is that state where Brahman dwelling within its own glory, independent, transcendent, beyond everything, and virat, that same divinity manifest as this visible universe. So this was another one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, that after this experience we see that the same Brahman has become all of this. It's a phrase that the Advaita Vedantins don't like very much, because Brahman can't become anything. But in the context in which Ramakrishna uses it, it's very, very helpful, and it was part of his experience also. Then, all of these are consistent with these other teachings. So when he talks about the distinction between the different schools of Vedanta, we talked about this a little earlier, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Dvaita. He's able to reconcile all of these schools and explain all of them in terms of where we're standing on the steps. So from each vantage point, each one is true and helpful. But the ultimate truth, of course, is only when we get to the roof. That's the only one that has any absolute truth to it, because it's the only one where there are no words to it. There's no concept, there's nothing there. It's just the direct experience of it. So he can explain these different schools of Vedanta in terms of different levels of awareness, which will also correspond a little bit to the Kundalini, the different chakras of Kundalini, and to the different rungs of the ladder. We can think, when he talks about this ladder going up, we can think of it in terms of Kundalini also. And some level we can think of it in terms of the three gunas, because there's also a journey of purification from the three lower tamasic levels, we can say, till we get to rajas mixed with tamas, then rajas mixed with sattva, then sattva mixed with rajas, then sattva, then pure sattva, the shuddha sattva, before we get to the roof. So there are all these different ways of understanding these things. Then all of his different teachings about the state of Jivan Mukti. This is a very, very confusing thing. When we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, I puzzled over these things for many, many years. How much scope is given to the concept of Jivan Mukti in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, when he'll say we have to have this highest experience, but that only a few people can keep the body. The whole concept of Jivan Mukti is that we have a realization and we remain in the body. So what type of scope does he give for that? It's a very interesting question, and it involves looking at all of the different statements that he makes about it, because very clearly he does believe in it and talks about it very often, that those who live in the world after realizing God. So exactly what it means, this also fits in with this Bhavamukha idea. Then the idea of the ripe ego and the unripe ego. And again, these have one meaning when we talk about going up the ladder, that the ripe ego is an attitude. It's something that we do as a spiritual practice. But after God realization, the role of the ego is essential to the existence of the individual. That one can't live in the world without a certain type of ego. So this is where he says Shankaracharya kept this Vidyami, this eye of knowledge, and the Chaitanya Dev others, they kept this Bhaktiyami, this ego of devotion. So this is a different type of ripe ego. This is really the perfectly transformed ego. Then all of his teachings about the essential oneness of personal God and the impersonal absolute, Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, the oneness of Brahman and Shakti, all of these things are tied in with this idea of Bhavamukha. And and there may be many other things. In fact, almost everything we can say comes out of this experience that Sri Ramakrishna had, not just all of the visions and types of God realization that he had before he met Tottapuri, but being immersed in that Nirvikalpa state and coming back from that, and what the world looks like after that. And all of his teachings came from that stage of his life after he came back, so it was all from his direct experience. So I wanted this first session mostly talk about the instances where Sri Ramakrishna heard this particular phrase. But what exactly it means from a philosophical point of view, from a historical point of view, is very, very hard to say. It's a little bit mysterious. Hari was asking me earlier if I read Swami Atmajnananda's book on the devotional schools of Vedanta. I went through it, not from beginning to end, but while I was working on this talk. He was a master. He was the expert of Vishishtadvaita, Advaita Vedanta, and other schools, devotional schools. And according to him, this term Bhavamukha is not found in any of these devotional schools of Vedanta. We don't find it in the Advaita Vedanta. You won't find it in a dictionary. Which, if we think about it, as rational people, we may say that Sri Ramakrishna heard this phrase of the Divine Mother because he was familiar with it. He had heard it before, that he's not going to hear the Divine Mother speaking to him in a language he doesn't understand, using terminology he doesn't understand, that there'll be something explainable in all of this, that it's not exactly that the Divine Mother is there, and she could say something that he speak in a different language, he wouldn't know what it was. As rational people, we would assume and would like to think that we understand it, that he must have already been familiar with this phrase and known it, and when she said it, he understood it. But we don't have any indication that that's true. And in fact, there were other times when Sri Ramakrishna seemed to hear something from the Divine Mother and wouldn't understand it completely, and would go to Halidhari or somebody else and say, "What does this mean?" He said, "Oh, this is what that means." He explained it that way. So we were almost forced to admit that there was something objectively true about all of this. How it happens, we don't exactly know. And what it meant to Sri Ramakrishna when he heard it, we don't exactly know, but he got the point. He got the point that he was not to remain in that nirvikalpa samadhi state anymore. That much we can say. So it's possible that he heard so many teachings from wandering sadhus and other things, but it's not a very traditional phrase. There's nothing that we can say, oh, this is from this text or from this teacher or this school or anything like that. But we can say in a very general way that the state of bhavamukha, bhava first of all, means some type of mental state or emotional state, some state of mind, ecstatic state of mind. Thakur uses the term throughout the gospel. We find it as bhava samadhi, this idea that there's a type of samadhi that has a devotional tinge to it, that in that state he could have all different types of visions and everything like that. So bhava, it can also mean reality, existence, a very broad term. Mukha means face. It can mean facing in a direction. Sometimes they'll explain it as kind of on the threshold, just about ready to enter into another state, something like that. But we can say in general, state of bhavamukha is one where the mind of the realized soul remained somewhere between this highest state of oneness, that state of nirvikalpa samadhi, where one is merged in the infinite Brahman, and a slightly lower state where if instead of looking that way, we look that way, we see everything as a manifestation of the divine. Everything permeated with consciousness, however we understand it, where the process of neti is no longer used, where we won't say that all of this is mithya. So this is interesting because for Shankaracharya, the Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma was never raised to the level of a Mahavakya. He didn't deny it or anything, but he didn't give it that much importance. He stressed this idea of the oneness in the individual soul and the supreme soul and everything. He stressed more this path of neti, this idea of this mityata, the falseness of this universe. So Sri Ramakrishna, we can almost say that, of course, he would have accepted all of the Mahavakyas, but the Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma is the experience that one has after Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Now, it can be used also as a spiritual practice. They talk about the path of iti rather than neti. It can be done that way. But for Sri Ramakrishna, this was his vision afterwards, that everything is indeed nothing but Brahman. Sarvam Kalu Idam, this entire universe is nothing but Brahman. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we don't hear much about this idea of Bhavamukha. Swami Sharadananda writes a lot about it in the Great Master. He considers it something extremely significant in the Lila Prasanga. And a lot of when I was researching this, comes directly from the Swami Sharadananda. He devotes several long sections to it, and as I say, he sees a tremendous significance in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, I want to look at the three different instances when Sri Ramakrishna heard these words, and he heard them exactly the same. We'll see the third time there was a little another phrase that was added to it, but otherwise it's that same. That tu vibhavmukitak, you remain in Bhavamukha, the same words, individual words were used. It's interesting to see these three different times, because the first two aren't so significant in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, and we don't get the impression that it was in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and that it was necessary to bring his mind down. But they're all interesting. The last time, of course, was Totapuri. This is the most important time. The first time he heard this, and we get this from his own lips, he explained this to his disciples, was sometime during the first 4 years of his sadhana. Sri Ramakrishna had a 12-year period of sadhana, which curiously begins only after his realization of the Divine Mother in the Kali temple. It is at a point in his life where anybody else would have been content that they had attained the highest and had realized the ultimate. There was no point in having to do any other spiritual practice. That was the beginning for him. Yeah. So if we get a little glimpse of what Swami Brahmananda meant when he said spiritual life begins with Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Otherwise, it's very hard to say. Now, it's interesting also, the first two times he heard it, that it involves his cousin Haladhari. Haladhari was an older cousin of Sri Ramakrishna's who also came from his village. Sometime he came as a priest in 1858. When Sri Ramakrishna came with Ramkumar, with his brother, as the temple grew and there was a need for more priests, most of them came either relatives of Sri Ramakrishna or distant relatives from his mother's side or from the same village, with that village Shiva or other places like that. So he also came. And those who knew Sri Ramakrishna when he was a boy, and those who were related to him, sometimes didn't know what the big fuss was. And this very often happens. They say if a prophet is not honored in his own land, they say, yeah, we know him. Either they thought he was crazy, or they thought he was eccentric. Sometimes they would recognize him, and with great devotion would bow down before him, and at other times they would just think that he's off his rocker. And then we have, of course, the extreme case of Hridoy, who actually more or less tortured him. And the extent to which Hridaya tortured him is hard to imagine, but Sri Ramakrishna said at one point he was ready to commit suicide, to take his own life. He was tormented so much by Hridaya. He said, as much as he served me, so much did he torture me. And we can imagine that how terrified Sri Ramakrishna was of Hridaya, so that when Holy Mother came, and when Hridaya insulted her and they said, we're leaving, that he couldn't even bring himself to say anything. Imagine how terrified he must have been. Otherwise we wonder, why didn't he say something? But then we see that he was just in a constant state where he said ultimately the Divine Mother had to remove him. And we know he did a foolish thing. He worshipped the daughter of Trailokanath, which was considered very inauspicious, he being a Brahmin and she from a low caste, that he was asked to leave at that time. That's also the time when, by mistake, they told Sri Ramakrishna that he was asked to leave the temple, and he said okay, and he threw his gamcha over his shoulder and started walking away. And then Mathur said they found out that no, you were supposed to tell Hridaya, not him. And they went and they said, please come back, it was a mistake. And he said okay, and he came back. And he didn't even care. So this was the nature of the Haladhari also, who was one of his relatives. So there was one occasion when the Haladhari raised very serious doubts in the mind of Sri Ramakrishna regarding the authenticity of his spiritual experiences. And we shouldn't think it was just him. Even our Narendra, on many, many occasions, would say these are hallucinations of your mind and everything. And Sri Ramakrishna was very childlike. Even though these were so vivid and lucid and everything, if somebody raised a doubt, then he would also think, well, maybe it is just my own imagination. But this Haladhari, he was very learned. He quoted all sorts of scriptural authorities, gave all different types of arguments, so that Sri Ramakrishna was in this state of confusion. Then we have this statement that, and this is related by Swami Premananda. So Sri Ramakrishna must have explained all of this to him. Swami Premananda said that Thakur told him, I thought that the divine visions I had had during ecstasy and the commands I had received were all false. So he had received other commands. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what they are, only this Mahamukh. The mother must have cheated me. I was extremely upset. Piqued, I cried to the mother, Mother, I am unlettered and ignorant. Why have you cheated me this way? I couldn't control myself and kept crying. I was in a room of the kuti. This is the bungalow north of Sri Ramakrishna's room. You know, the room where Thakur, we consider his bedroom, where whenever we go to Dakshineshwar, we visit that room. He didn't live there initially. He lived in this other room in that other bungalow north of the Nahabat. And when his nephew Akshay came to stay with him, he loved this Akshay very, very much. There's a story of Akshay is very sad, interesting also, that Akshay's mother died when he was born, and his father knew somehow that if Akshay, when he himself was to be married, that he also wouldn't live. So this is Thakur's brother. He refused to hold him or get attached to him or anything like that. This was the period when Sri Ramakrishna was in Kumarpukur. He was probably 14, 15, 16, 17, something like that, before he went with Ram Kumar to practically raised him. He was practically a father, older brother, a very close joint family, of course, so he was tremendously attached to this Akshay. And we know that it actually happened, that the marriage was arranged and everything, that he came down with fever and died very quickly, and that Sri Ramakrishna was heartbroken. He said when he first saw it, he laughed. He saw that soul left the body like a sword being taken out of a sheath, but the next day he said, oh, how my heart was just like that wet cloth. how he grieved for this Akshay. Akshay died in this room where Sri Ramakrishna was, so after that he couldn't live there anymore. So that's why he moved to the room that we know now, and that was, I think, probably like 16 years in one, 16 years in the other, something like that. So I was in a room of the Kuti at that time. After a while, a smoke-like mist arose from the floor and covered the space before me. Then I saw within it a golden complexioned, living, calm face with a long flowing beard. That figure looked at me intently and said in a deep voice, Ore tui bhavamukhe tak. My child, remain in bhavamukha, remain in bhavamukha, remain in bhavamukha. He heard it 3 times. So that was the first instance. The second is similar, also involves Haladhari, and we don't know when it took place. Swami Sharananda thinks that it may have been towards the end of Sri Ramakrishna's practice of this Madhur Bhava. This Madhur Bhava, at that time, Sri Ramakrishna was staying in a house of Mathur Babu, and worshipping the Divine Mother as her handmaid. And this type of practice, it's done, it can be done in the Vaishnava practice, this also as the Divine Mother, but the devotee dresses in the woman's garb, feels that it's a woman. This relationship between the lover and the beloved, generally the devotee feels himself to be the woman in that relationship, and Krishna is the man in that relationship. So he would dress in women's dress. Mathur Babu got some jewelry and things. Actually, after that, Holy Mother wore some of the jewelry that was given to him by Mathur Babu at that time for that spiritual practice. Anyhow, the problem with this is that Sri Ramakrishna talks about still doing worship in the Kali temple, which he had stopped earlier. So we don't know exactly what it was, but in any event, it was before his Vedantic practice, before Totapuri came. Now the Haladhari started scolding Sri Ramakrishna. He said, "What are you doing? You're dressing like a woman. It looks so odd. What type of spiritual practice is this?" So again, Thakur had some doubt in his mind, and he says, Haladhari's words raised doubts in my mind at another time. So, while performing puja at the temple, now it sounds like the Kali temple, who knows? Maybe he meant while in their personal shrine there at Mathur's house. Anyhow, I cried and pressed the mother to solve the matter. At that time, Mathur took the guise of Rati's mother. So the Divine Mother now is coming to him. So presumably his eyes open and he sees, what may have been in Bhava, we don't know. But who this Rati's mother was, we don't know exactly. We don't know if it was just in a vision or if she seemed to appear also there in the temple. We don't know too much about it. But he says, the mother took the guise of Rati's mother just in front of the consecrated pitcher. We don't know where that was also. And said to me, again, Tui Bhavamukhi Tak, remain in Bhavamukha, using the same words, same exact phrase. This time once. So now we have 4 times he said it. Now, neither of these instances seem terribly important. And they don't really explain what it means at all. And it's nothing about bringing the mind down from Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So it's really the 3rd time that is the most important. And this is where, as I say, all of these great teachings take place. So this is during the time of Sri Ramakrishna's, what we call his Vedantic sadhana. When Totapuri came, and I mentioned before that he had 12 years of sadhana, that these are generally broken down into 3 periods of 4 years each. And they kind of jump around a little bit, because after his realization of the Divine Mother, he switched right away to the Vaishnava practices. These Panchabhava, these different practices there, starting with getting this mood of Hanuman, and do the Dasya Bhava and all of these different things. Part of the reason was that he had no spiritual guide, he had no guru. He received some type of very basic initiation just in order to perform puja in the Kali temple. But otherwise, with this Kedarnath Bhattacharya, so we don't really consider him a guru like the Brahmani or any of the others. He didn't follow any scriptural injunctions, so there was a tiny doubt, and also a curiosity about other spiritual paths, a tiny doubt of how reliable was it to do it the way that he did. So anyhow, and really for the benefit of everyone else, so he could verify all of the different spiritual paths, he tried all of these different types of sadhana. So he did his Vaishnava sadhana, then he did his tantric sadhana. Each time someone would come, the Brahmani would come, and then the Jatadhari came, and he worshipped Rama that way. And so this took us almost to the end of his spiritual practice. Yeah, I have a little thing here. His own explanation of why he was not satisfied with his first experience of the Divine Mother. He said, "One who lives near the sea sometimes has a desire to find out how many pearls are hidden in the ocean's depths. Similarly, after realizing the Divine Mother and being constantly near her, I thought that I should see her multiple forms. If I had a desire to see her in a particular way, I would plead with her with a longing heart. Then the gracious Mother would supply whatever was necessary to experience that form or aspect of God, make me practice that sadhana, and reveal herself to me accordingly. Thus, I practice sadhanas belonging to various paths." And then, of course, after that period, he had his experience of Christ, and he had his Islamic sadhana and all of that. So that at the end he could make this great statement, Yotam Totopat, all of these different faiths and religions are only so many paths to God. So he did the Vaishnava sadhanas, then he went to Kamarpur for a break, he came back, he did his tantric sadhanas, and finally, after doing this Madhura Bhava, see how his mind could go back and forth. So he did what's considered to be the highest type of spiritual practice according to the Vaishnava tradition, this Panchabhava doctrine, looking upon God as the beloved. And just after he had finished that sadhana, this very big, strong, austere-looking monk from Punjab, not wearing any clothing or anything, shows up. This Totapudi, whom Ramakrishna referred to as Nangtai, the naked one. So he showed up that day, and there couldn't have been any greater difference between two individuals as between him and Ramakrishna. He was head of a monastery from North India, someplace in the Punjab. Some of the other disciples actually saw that monastery, and I think know where it is. I don't know if there's too much there today or anything, but he was very, very austere. He would never stay in any one place for more than 3 days at a time, so that he could never be attached to anything. And after long practice of many, many years of deep meditation, he had attained to that point where he could enter into that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So this was that Totapudi, and many, many wandering monks, if they were in that part of Bengal, would go to the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, because it was very well known at this point as a place where monks of all denominations could come. And there would be a place for them to stay for a few days, and they could get food there. So many different monks would come, and Sri Ramakrishna always, of course, enjoyed their company and everything. So the Totapuri, he took one look at Sri Ramakrishna and said, "What is this?" In Bengal, which was not known for sannyasas, this whole custom of taking sannyas, especially Shankaracharya tradition, there were these Boiragis and others. But in Bengal, which is filled with devotion and everything, to see such a qualified aspirant for this Vedantic sadhana, he said he was amazed. So when he saw Sri Ramakrishna there, and at this time, remember, Sri Ramakrishna was married. He'd already had his marriage to the Holy Mother, and was looking after his own mother. She was also staying in Nahabat at that time. So, not an ideal circumstance for someone to become a sannyasin. Right? But this was the situation there. And of course he told the Totapuri, because Totapuri said, are you interested? I can initiate you into this Vedantic path and give you vows of sannyasa. So he said, let me check with my mother first. So Totapuri thought, very nice, okay, let him talk to his mother. He had no idea that he meant the Divine Mother. So he went to the Kali temple, and the Divine Mother somehow gave her okay for all of that. So he became, Totapuri became one of his several gurus that way for this Vedantic sadhana. And the main spiritual discipline that he was to undergo was meditation, the type of meditation where one tries to make the mind perfectly still and free from all vrittis. So we call this is a jnana marg path of knowledge, but it was also this kind of a Raja Yoga path. The traditional Upanishadic path doesn't really incorporate this idea of nirvikalpa samadhi. We don't find this in the Upanishads. This is in the Upanishads. The idea is more the mind gets filled with light, and we have some awakening and understanding. This is a little different. The mind gets merged in the absolute. So the sannyas ceremony took place early morning, Viraja Homa, all of the traditional things that are done, and he received the sannyasa mantras, and then the Totapuri said, now you sit for meditation and make your mind perfectly still. Sri Ramakrishna tried several times, and then each time he said the vision of the Divine Mother came before his mind's eye, and he would get lost in that, and Totapuri would say, no, you have to make the mind perfectly free of all vrittis that way. And he tried several times and said he couldn't do it, and Totapuri got very agitated, and he saw a little piece of broken glass on the ground, and he took that and he pressed it against the place between the two eyebrows, and he said, fix your mind there. So Sri Ramakrishna said, I sat down to meditate again, firmly determined. As soon as the form of the Divine Mother appeared in my mind, I used my discrimination as a sword of knowledge, and with it mentally cut that form in two. Then all distinctions disappeared from my mind, and it swiftly soared beyond the realm of name and form, and I lost myself in samadhi. This means nirvikalpa samadhi. Samadhi was a very common occurrence with him before. And what the distinction is between the samadhi he had in his first experience at the Kali temple and what he has here is a little hard to understand, because there he says he was engulfed wave after wave, and he of consciousness and bliss, and he lost all awareness of the outer world. Sounds like nirvikalpa samadhi, but we generally say that this was his nirvikalpa samadhi because perhaps some experience of that he's in the presence of Mother. When he came to, he said ma ma ma, as if he had had that experience. So in any event, we take this to be his experience of that very highest and ultimate state of realization, this nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, Totapuri was amazed, and he saw that this was continuing, so he said, let him remain in that state. And so he was in this little hut behind the Panchavati there, and he kept him in there, and he kept the door closed, and waiting outside to see when he would call for him, or he would get up from that state. And Totapuri, he knew about the state of samadhi, because it was something that was his own experience. Otherwise, it sounds very odd that he allowed Ramakrishna to stay 3 days and nights in that state. Otherwise, we would think, wasn't he curious? Didn't he go check? Didn't he think that he had to eat? Something like that. But he knew in that state, the bodily functions are slowed down to such a point that it's not the same. That someone really in that state of samadhi can remain in that state. So 3 days and 3 nights came. Then finally, Totapuri, he couldn't wait anymore. He had to go see what happened. So he went in and he saw that Sri Ramakrishna was practically lifeless, sitting like that. Almost no signs of heartbeat or breath, pulse, anything like that. Then we read in the Great Master, Totapuri said, "Is what I see really true? Is it possible that this great soul has realized in 3 days what I could accomplish only after 40 long years of strenuous spiritual practice?" And Totapuri then examined his body very minutely, looking for signs of life, because he could have died. It almost looked like he was dead. Signs of life, heartbeat, or breath, because there were many times when they didn't know if Sri Ramakrishna was dead or alive. In fact, when he actually did give up the body, there were many, Narendra himself, who thought, no, it's only samadhi. They couldn't tell. And they tried so many things, rubbing key on his body and everything, and repeating the name of Mother, so many things. So very hard to tell if someone is even alive in that state. He touched Sri Ramakrishna's body and found it motionless like a piece of wood, without the slightest response or any sign of consciousness of the body. Overwhelmed with joy and wonder, Totapuri cried out, "Ah, what a display of divine Maya! This is real samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, the final goal of the path of knowledge according to Vedanta. He has achieved it in 3 days. How miraculous is God's power!" Now, we don't know when or why or how, but Sri Ramakrishna's mind came down. He only stayed for 3 days at that time. And then we know that Totapuri, who had never stayed anywhere for 3 days, stayed for 11 months with Sri Ramakrishna. And they enjoyed their company together so much, would have the dhuni and would discuss spiritual things. And Totapuri himself had to learn many truths from Sri Ramakrishna. That was a common thing, that the gurus would come to teach Ramakrishna, and they would end up having their spiritual lives changed in the process of the whole thing. Now, as soon as Totapuri left, after that 11-month period, then Sri Ramakrishna resolved to remain in that state of nirvikalpa samadhi continuously. This is interesting because when Narendra told Sri Ramakrishna that he wanted to do that, he got a big scolding. And when we examine all the things that took place then, it's much more significant, that scene. You remember in Kashipur that Narendra had a taste of that nirvikalpa samadhi experience, and Swami Advaitananda and others, they came to Sri Ramakrishna and said, "Oh, Narendra, something's happened to him. It looks like he's even dead. His body is cold." And Sri Ramakrishna laughed. That leave him alone for a while. He pestered me so long for that experience, because he knew it was his nirvikalpa state. Not only knew it, probably was the cause of it. So later, he said, "Bring Naren to me." And Naren went there, and he said, "Now you've had the experience of this. Tell me, what would you like?" And he said, "I'd like to remain in that state." only having a little body consciousness return so that I can take a little food, the body can be nourished, and I can go back into that state of nirvikalpa samadhi. Exactly what we'll see happened with Ramakrishna. But Thakur said to him, "Oh, and how small-minded are you? And don't you know there's a higher state?" And then we will end up with all of these teachings about the Vijnana state and everything. But what happened after this is something very, very strange. Sri Ramakrishna spent 6 months in that nirvikalpa state, and we don't know why or what other people were doing. Didn't they notice that he wasn't there? Does it ever strike anybody as unusual?
Yes.
That it had to be some wandering monk who happened to show up providentially, who saw Sri Ramakrishna in that state, and who knew that his body had to be preserved somehow, and did exactly what Swamiji said, that he would take a stick and he would just hit him enough to bring a little body consciousness down so that he could put a little milk or a little food in his mouth. Sometimes Thakur would swallow it, sometimes he wouldn't. Just enough so that life could remain in the body. Where was Mata Babu at this time? He was still living. Holy Mother must have been in Yagambati or something. It was very strange. Why? But in any event, we're fortunate that this wandering monk was there. Sri Ramakrishna later explained. He said, "For 6 months I was in that state from which an ordinary mortal never returns." So this will be one of the things that we talk about, this nirvikalpa state. Ordinarily the body can live only for 21 days in that state. Now, this statement that the body will fall after 21 days was also not original with Sri Ramakrishna. Almost, another curious thing, almost all of his important teachings he heard from other people who didn't have the authority that he had, of course. But he would say, "I heard from a wandering monk in Rishikesh, I heard from this," I think it was Tarayanga Swami. I heard from him that the body falls off after 21 days. But that doesn't take, he's the one who verified these things, and he's the one who gave the authority to it. Anyhow, he says, ordinarily, the body can live only for 21 days in that state. Then it falls like a dry leaf from a tree. See, 21 days in that state may be equivalent to, just if the ordinary body can't live without nourishment, for a certain period of time, we can say, because the bodily functions are slowed down so much, it can go longer. There is no consciousness of time, the coming of day or the passing of night. Flies would enter my mouth and nostrils just as they do a dead body. See, there must have been times when he wasn't 6 months in this nirvikalpa state entirely. There must have been times, if we try to imagine, where the mind comes down a tiny bit, so that he can just kind of see his body as if it belongs to somebody else. Where he knows a little food is in his mouth, then would go back up again. It had to be something like that, huh? Different depths and levels of samadhi. So he was aware of this apparently. Flies would enter my mouth and nostrils, just as they do a dead body, but I did not feel them. My hair became matted with dust. Sometimes I did not know when the call of nature was answered. Could this body survive? It should have died at that time, but luckily a monk then arrived in Dakshineshwar. He held a small stick like a ruler. As soon as he saw me, he recognized my state. So even in this state, somehow Thakur knew these things were happening. He understood that much of Mother's work was yet to be done through this body, and many people would benefit if it were preserved. So at meal times he would bring some food and strike my body with the stick again and again to bring it back to consciousness. The moment he saw signs that I was becoming conscious, he would thrust some food into my mouth. Some days a little food found its way into my stomach. On other days, none did. 6 months passed in this way. So we can't imagine how this is possible. Now, this is when Sri Ramakrishna says he heard the same words, Ore, Tui Bhamukhi Tak, that he heard the voice of the Divine Mother. And so he says, finally, I received that command from the Divine Mother. But there was one addition this time. Bhamukhi Tak. Then, in between that, Lok Sikha Jonno Bhahamukita. So, for the welfare of others, in order to teach others, remain in the state of Bhavam. So he was given a reason for it, that he had a mission in life, that there was a purpose for him to come down to the relative plane again. So remain in Bhavamukha in order to teach others for the welfare of the world. Remain in Bhavamukha. Now, the other two times, one time he saw in a vision a face appeared, golden complexion, long beard, it said it. Second time it was as if this Rati's mother came in person somehow to say it. This time, Swami Sharananda says that Sri Ramakrishna heard in his heart the Ashariri Bani, bodiless. So it didn't come through anyone's mouth or through any particular form. He says the disembodied words of Jagadamba, the mother of the universe. Now the other interesting thing is that this wasn't enough. That Sri Ramakrishna himself tells us that shortly after this, or during this period, he developed a very acute case of dysentery. He always had stomach problems throughout his life, and that the pain of that blood dysentery that he had was so intense that also brought his mind down. But he really attributes it, of course, to the words of the Divine Mother that just came deep within his heart. He had no vision or anything at that time. Now, what was the result of this long stay, 6 months? One was that after that, his mind had a tendency to go back into that state, constantly being pulled up. He had to really apply great effort to keep his mind from going back into that state of samadhi. It became a very natural state with him. One of Thakur's early disciples or devotees, we don't know, that he used to call Captain. He spoke of seeing Sri Ramakrishna immersed in samadhi for 3 days and nights continually. This is after that. And that he himself he knew some trick, that he put a ghee on his back and rubbed it up down the spinal cord and everything, so that he finally brought his mind down. Otherwise, he would remain in these spiritual states. Even when Holy Mother came, the whole night that he would go into these ecstatic states, and sometimes the Nirvikalpa state and all of that. So she got no sleep. She was afraid he would die or something would happen. When he realized it, then he told her that she should move to the Nahabad. He rarely spoke in those days. He was so indrawn and everything. So this was the first result. The second result of all of this was what we'll see in the next session, all of the beautiful teachings that came out of this experience. Everything that we learned, or that whole list of things that I spoke before. So after this, Sri Ramakrishna's vision was changed. Whenever he would open his eyes, he would see this divine manifestation everywhere. Without using the expression Bhavamukha, we get a very nice explanation of what this state means. This is from Sri Ramakrishna himself. This is from the section, the festival at Adhar's house. And he's describing this Bhavamukha state in terms of Kundalini. He said, when the Kundalini rises to the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus at the top of the head, and the mind goes into Samadhi, the aspirant loses all consciousness of the outer world. He can no longer retain his physical body. If milk is poured into his mouth, it runs out again. In that state, the life breath lingers for 21 days, and then passes out, entering the Kalopani, the black waters of the ocean. This was a kind of folk myth at that time. The ship never comes back. But the Ishvara Kotis, such as the incarnations of God, can come down from this state of Samadhi. They can descend from this exalted state because they like to live in the company of the devotees and enjoy the love of God. God retains in them the ego of knowledge or the ego of devotion so that they may teach others. And then this is a very nice explanation. The mind moves between the sixth and seventh planes. Their minds. They run a boat race back and forth, as it were, between these two planes. So, this is that state of Bhavamukha. And in the next session, we'll go and examine some of these teachings that I mentioned, that all are directly related to the state, some of the most important teachings, where we get everything from the other side. This is a very rare thing. This is from those who have been to the mountain and come back. And we get to find out what's on the other side, and directly from someone who has been there. So we'll stop here now. What time are we supposed to go? No special closing time. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them now. Of course, most of them will be answered in the next session. When is the next session?
6:30 is Arati.
Oh, after that, so tonight. But if anybody has any questions now, you can ask.
Did Thakur himself want to stay in that Bhavamukha state?
It sounds like it.
Okay.
Now, he also says that in that state, well, the Bhavamukha state, of course. I mean, that's, but did he want to stay in the Nirvikalpa state? They're two different things.
Right.
Yeah. That Nirvikalpa state, it's not a question of wanting to stay in it. It pulls you up. There's a conversation that takes place between M and Sri Ramakrishna once, where Sri Ramakrishna is asking him about his state and everything, and he said that your mind naturally tends to go to this state, but you've kept a small, and just a little touch of ego, and to bring the mind down a little bit. And he corrects him. He says no. He said the Divine Mother kept it. Because in that state, there's no question, do you want to come down from that state or not? There's no I in that state. So it was only this divine command of the Mother and everything. So not that he wanted to remain in that state, but it was the natural tendency of his mind to go up. Afterwards, we can say he avoided it. He wanted to remain in this Bhavamukha state in between, because he wanted to enjoy the company of the devotees, and he knew he had a mission to fulfill, and otherwise he couldn't do it. So he would even pray to the Divine Mother. Mother, don't make me lose consciousness and Brahmajnana and everything that way. So, yeah, this, but not so much a question, did he want to remain in it or anything like that. He knew he was so identified with the Divine Mother at that point, and that this was the... See, for him, this Vijnana state, this is always a question, is which is higher, state of Vijnana or Vijnana? State of Vijnana, where that's we've made it to the roof. We have to come down a few steps to be in this state of Vijnana. But it's not the same as being a few steps away from the top. So there will be some who will say, well, yes, the mind is on a slightly lower level, but it's a higher state, because it's all of the transformation that takes place by getting to the roof gets manifested in that other state. But the Bhavamukha state includes both of them, where we equal access to the seventh plane, the roof, and then the sixth plane, or sometimes Thakur said the mind will go down to the heart center, but not below it. We would explain it that way.
So the Thakur had the same level of Nirvikalpa Samadhi at all different paths, or only through the Advaita or Shakta, or he attained all those Nirvikalpa Samadhi at all those different paths?
This is what I was saying before. I don't understand exactly what is. There's such subtle distinctions here, but generally we restrict this Nirvikalpa Samadhi to this particular experience. After that, his mind could have entered into that same Nirvikalpa Samadhi state through anything. But even this Nirvikalpa Samadhi state must have levels to it.
Yeah.
And the longer his mind would remain in it, the harder it would be for it to come back down. Because sometimes we read that he entered into a very deep state of samadhi. Other times he would be in samadhi for a few minutes and then would be singing and dancing. There was one time when there were many songs to Shiva being sung. And Shiva represents the Absolute. And he went into a very deep state of samadhi, and they had great difficulty bringing his mind down from that state. And then afterwards he said, "This is dangerous for me, all of these songs about Shiva, sing some songs about the Divine Mother afterwards, otherwise my mind will go up that way." So it's very hard to say. Generally, he would go into what we call Bhava Samadhi, where he would have different visions and feelings and other things that way. No awareness of the external world, but something going on. Only this Nirvikalpa state, there's nothing particular going on that way. But we just guess at these things a little bit that way. Very hard to say. But I'll talk about this tonight, because I think it's important to understand for us that there is a way to enter this Nirvikalpa state where the mind can still come back from it. But if we go and we get too deep within it and get merged in it and everything, then see you later. There's no coming back down unless the Divine Mother herself does it for us. But, yeah. Swami Sarvadevananda was at our center recently, and he was talking about that there's some places where they, maybe in Yoga Vasishta or something, they talk about all these different planes and stages of Nirvikalpa Samadhi even. Yeah. So it may just be in the very highest stage that the ordinary person can't come back down. Because Thakur talks about even our little desires may pull the mind down. Anyway, we'll get into that also tonight.
So Jnana and Vijnana is two different levels. The Jnana means like a Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and Vijnana level is not a Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it's below that level, right?
Either below it or beyond it.
I thought...
Mind is coming down a little bit, but it's a higher vision. Thakur says it's a special type of knowledge.
Okay. That's Vijnana.
Yeah, not only special type of knowledge, but it has to do with the direct experience. So he'll say things like, the Jnani has, seen milk, but the Vijnani has tasted it and has become nourished by it. So he'll talk about the Vijnana state really as a more mature or higher type of state, one level, even though the mind has come down a little bit in that state. He'll talk about the Vijnana state where you can talk to God. You see God, visions and all sorts of things. So for him, it's a very special state, it's a state of Vijnana. Yeah. Okay, so we break for tea now, huh? Okay.